Hello, welcome to the NYU Postdoc Oral History series, which is dedicated to honoring the personal and the professional legacy of our senior faculty, as well as the history of our community. My name is Carina Grossmark, and I have the great pleasure of interviewing Dr. Andrew Druck today. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you for doing this, Carina. I know you had to reschedule people, and
It's my pleasure, really.
pleasure is also
It's
mine.
an honor. So I guess I thought we could start by asking you a little bit about your journey and how did you become interested in the field, in psychology and psychoanalysis?
Well, I actually evolved into it. Um, um, when I started college, I thought I was going to be a historian. And I was interested in history. And then I became involved with sociology. But I went to City, and the department at City in sociology is terrible, or was terrible. And I was working in Columbia, which had the best sociology department. So I knew what I wasn't getting. And City had a great psychology department. So I took some courses and I became interested in that, and I decided to go to graduate school. And then I got to Adelphi. I could have gone to Syracuse, which I made, and I was on the waiting list at Adelphi. I get a call from Adelphi, we'd love to have you, and we'll give you an NIH scholarship, free tuition, plus $1,800 a year. And Adelphi was mind-opening for me. A lot of people who'd been around, I was very young. I got my PhD at 27. So I was about 22 when I started graduate school. And I had people who'd been teachers and ministers, and I had an actress who's a postdoc, a working actress, not a waitress who said she wanted to be an actress. And I learned about the unconscious and psychoanalysis. It was the most psychoanalytically oriented program around. So I found my place, and it was clear I was going to go to a postdoc, clear to me. I had started analysis, my analyst was a postdoc, and
Was Adelphi integrated with postdoc?
Adelphi had nothing to do with it. Adelphi had its own postdoctoral program, and it had people, I think it was mostly geared to people from the island. It seemed to me there was very little overlap.
So Andy, can I ask you a bit about how your personal journey played a role in your being curious and interested in the field?
Well, I was always the one in my family who tried to mediate conflict, to come up with ideas and ways of negotiating between people who are fighting. So that, and the classic thing is you go into this field to cure your parents. So that certainly applied. My parents came after the war.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a laundromat, and I worked in the laundry. I was delivering laundry on the Upper West Side when it was not a classy neighborhood. I'd deliver laundry, and then I'd work in the store, and it was very hard work for my parents, who had no formal education here. What they said, they made it very clear to us, I don't care what profession you go into, but you shouldn't have to work in the store like we do. So it was clear that all of us were going to do something like that. But they had no idea what psychology was or psychoanalysis was. They didn't believe in it. But I think that part of this, of course, was to, that was always my role. But I didn't articulate it to myself. I didn't know when I went to graduate school, this is what I'm going to do. Unconsciously, I must have known, but
right.
So.
And your first encounter with psychology was through sociology, you said.
My first encounter was through City, but I really understood what it was at Adelphi.
Right.
And that experience was just terrific for me. Showed me much more what could be possible.
Mm-hmm.
I was interacting with people from totally different milieus.
Mm-hmm.
It was just terrific.
Mm-hmm.
You know. And then, I mean, you asked me before about conflict theory. It's not that I was interested in conflict theory per se. It wasn't that. It was that I started around the same time. I started an analysis. My analyst was a straight classical analyst. I was working my first job was at Brooklyn State Hospital with psychotic patients. We had an inpatient unit that it wasn't, it was a quick inpatient unit. There was a real, we did work. And then I worked at St. Luke's in day treatment center for borderline patients. So I'm immersed with more difficult patients. I was at Postdoc, and I didn't know when I came in, my poor analyst, if I was going to be if I liked interpersonal theory or Freudian theory. I go back and forth all the time. I mean, this is, we were talking before, this is a theme for me all the way, reconciling different things.
Right.
So it started out before, but interpersonal Freudian. And my first supervisor was Ed Levinson, who I really wanted to supervise. And all I did was talk to him about these kinds of things.
Wonderful. And you picked him?
I picked him, yeah. I was lucky to get him.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd be back and forth. There was no relational track at that point.
Right.
And meanwhile, I'm at St. Luke's. And then what happened to me, two things. One is Lowald, which we'll hold for a minute, and the other one is Marvin Hervich. So Marvin, at St. Luke's, the patients needed to have an outside therapist. So I had a very, very disturbed patient, and Marvin was her therapist. Meanwhile, he was supervising me on my, quote, neurotic control case at Postdoc.
How interesting.
So, and I not only was going crazy between am I interpersonal or Freudian, but for me, the question of Kernberg and Kohut was a big question. Right. How do you deal with borderline patients? Mm-hmm. So one day, I'm with his patient who was difficult, and I gave her the full Kernberg thing. I mean, so I walk into Marvin's office, and he says, "Sit down." And then he spends 45 minutes in the sweetest way. I mean, you'd think I'd be terribly humiliated and all that, but somehow he made it work, explaining to me why every single thing I said to that patient, to his patient, was completely the wrong thing, and why. And it turned me around, honestly.
Huh.
In two ways. It turned me around in terms of understanding where Kernberg's approach missed the point, and that I wouldn't call it Kohut. Buey and Adler, the people I used to teach, a more deficit-oriented approach made more sense. Mm-hmm. And it shifted my way of thinking in that way. And because it had to do with an inner world and with internal structure. Mm-hmm. And it shifted me to being a Freudian. Wow. Because at that point, it seemed to me, I'm not saying it's true, that the interpersonal track didn't have as well developed an idea about internal life. So now it's also true that by then I'd been in analysis with my Freudian analyst for a while, so it took hold. But really, that's when I felt I became a Freudian and I identified more as a Freudian. And I owe Marvin everything in that sense. Around the same time, I read Lowell's Ego and Reality. Why I read it, I can't tell you. It made no sense. As I remember it, I read it over the summer. And you know, I am the king of reading garbage. I read thrillers. I'm the only analyst in New York City who has the collected works of Stephen King on his bookshelves. Really, right over there, three things. So why I'm reading Ego and Reality, I don't know. But I came in enthusiastic. It changed my view of what Freudians are, of Freudian psychoanalysis, completely. Because I won't go the whole spiel about it, but before then it was all adaptation and reality testing and conflict. And I saw that Lowell made room for the experience of reality, experience of the self, the intertwined nature of the analyst and the patient. And that whole thing about development and what happens when the capacities of mind are not fully developed, and how does that affect conflict and compromise formation, and what's the role of the analyst? That also opened up my whole idea of what Freudians are. People don't realize how assimilative Freudians are. They all think, we're sitting around thinking about libidinal instincts. So between Marvin and what happened, the comparison between the patient at St. Luke's and my control case, and my being exposed and reading more of Lowell, I became much more, not just identified as a Freudian, but involved in what's always been a big thing for me, which is the interplay between deficit, which is capacities of mind that aren't developed, and conflict, and internal conflict. And that's when I wrote that book. I wrote a book which there were 2-3 chapters in there about Kernberg, because I wanted to understand that. There was a big chapter about 4 different approaches to working with borderline patients, which is already, remember, I'm going from contrasting interpersonal and Freudian, so now it becomes the evolution of Freudian psychoanalysis. And then there were several chapters about Lowell, which I don't think people read. I mean, at that point, I'm not sure how, it didn't have any influence. But that's when I started talking about the right wing and the left wing of Freudian psychoanalysis. It's right there. I was going to call it the Yankees and the Mets.
You might as well.
And the implications of it, and the role of the analyst. And that became a whole thing. And I remember, and then I'll shut up. I remember I was going to my first meeting with Jason Aronson, right? The publisher. So he comes, I think I'm going to have this long, theoretical, complicated discussion about the book. He cared about 3 things. It shouldn't be Andrew B. Druck, it should be Andrew Druck on the title page. I should put in subheadings in the chapters, and he wanted a different title. It used to be, you couldn't have psychoanalytic in the title. I think I might have called it at some point psychoanalytic supportive therapy. That's no good. So it became 4 therapeutic approaches to the borderline patient, which is not a title I'd pick. Now when if I write a paper, if I can, I title it The Rock and Roll Song, if I can. The Ties That Bind, for example. The Friedman lecture. I know it's only Freudian, but I like it, yes I do. That's a Rolling Stone song, Take Off. and I had to write in copyright by the Rolling Stone. But those were formative for me,
right,
in terms of identifying with as a Freudian and thinking about a Freudian.
That's really wonderful. So it was one question I had was, well, it sounds like Marvin Hurwitz and Lowell have been foundational for your
No question.
for your thinking. And one question I had was there anyone else that comes to mind?
Well, in different ways. Fred Pine, I never, everybody thinks, because I always cited him, that he didn't supervise me. I took his course on development, but his writing spoke to me. And he knew that. How he knows this, people know all kind of stuff. It might have been that when I taught one of my classes, his wife was in class, and somebody said, "Who's the best person to read about this?" And I said, "Fred Pine." That could have been it. His writing, because he's the only one who, how do you know something's deficit, right? You're going to, like a self-psychologist would just say, it's deficit. But you can't do it that way. You have to have some kind of criteria. You have to way of think. He is the only one, to my knowledge, who wrote papers trying to distinguish when it's really deficit or when it really is something that looks like deficit, but it's basically conflict. Nobody else thought about it. And I was very struck by that. And I would cite him and I would teach him, and he wrote all that stuff. Also, he opened up, Lowell opened up Freudian psychoanalysis in one way. Fred Pine opened it up in a different way. The four therapeutic approaches, the psychoanalytic dictionary. So he made it assimilative and showed how you could do that. But it wasn't personal in that sense, although he and I had some contact as he got older and as I got older. And he actually, there was a thing, a conference for him, and he'd asked me to write a paper for it, which I was very honored by. But the other person was Bert Friedman. And it wasn't through Postdoc. It was after I got my, after I graduated, Marvin takes me out to lunch, and he says, "Why don't you apply to IPTAR?" And at that point, people were applying to IPTAR because IPTAR actually had not been in international yet. But people did it because Postdoc didn't really have a home afterwards. There was nothing to do when you graduated. They had the Psychoanalytic Society, but they didn't do much. No offense to anybody. So I went to, as did many, many, many of our graduates. Gil Katz, Mary Libby, Richie, Judy. As a matter of fact, it became a problem at IPTAR because they felt the Freudians were taken over. And when we got into the international, and there was this called window of opportunity, so people could go to Freudian Society or IPTAR as a way of, quote, taking a course and graduating. And if you graduated, then you could be in the IPA. And it was the only way to get in.
Can I ask you, what year was that? Would you remember?
I graduated in postdoc in '81. So we're talking about in the mid-'80s. So that became a big problem at IPTAR because they felt the Freudians were bringing in their friends and we were taking over. It still rippled. So and Bert was running the place. So in 10 minutes I was on the board. And before you know it, I was the dean. You had to be a fellow, which is a training analyst, to be the dean, and you had to be there 5 years, and I was only there 4. So Bert, being Bert, said, "You're acting dean for a year."
Excellent.
So I was acting dean for a year. I became dean. I was dean and for 7 years. I was also president-elect. The president died, so I cut my deanship because I made it 7 instead of 8, and I was president for 3 years at IPTAR. And Bert really guided me. He was my mentor in a way I'd never had before, really. And in the beginning, you know, I mean, I was head of admissions, of evaluations. You know, Postdoc doesn't have evaluations. And I'm in charge of evaluations and getting committees. So I'd be on the phone with Bert all the time. Who to pick? But Bert, unique to somebody like that, as he taught me and as I developed, he'd back off. We could fight. We could disagree. He'd be there for advice. He'd be there for mentorship. He was one of the wisest men I knew. I mean, I loved him.
Yes.
Really, and he helped.
Wonderful
And I
scholar.
grew, but it was not somebody like who's controlling and this and this and this. He was able to just let me grow.
Yeah, and he embraced you. So wonderful.
And so he was an enormous influence.
So Bert was another
Yeah.
important person. What was happening at Postdoc that you needed to find a different home? Was there no room at the time for graduates to find their way into teaching and mentoring?
The group, I'm not the only one who feels this. The group above me, the people running it, Postdoc, the Freudian track. Don't forget, the Freudians and the interpersonalists hated each other. And it was a time of a lot of strife, which we don't have anymore in the same way. It's a different generation, and the tracks have become much more assimilative of each other. And I've actually, this I know I probably said to you, when people start comparing your relational, your Freudian, if you line people up, there may be more commonalities between certain relational people and certain Freudian people than there are between certain Freudians and other ones and relational. There's a wide variation in the relational track and in the Freudian track. But at that time, the relational, no relational, the interpersonal and Freudians just put each other down all the time. And the Freudians running the place kept it to themselves. They didn't want new people in there. They were not very
Welcoming.
welcoming is a tactful way of saying it.
Exactly.
I'll tell you a story, okay?
Please.
The person's dead, but was very active. I was giving my very first ever talk, right? Whatever they call it, the scientific meeting, right? You know, blah, blah, blah. And a discussant, right? The discussant was a big shot, right? I'm nobody. Here's my paper. So, and the discussant spoke slow. I speak fast. And I always time, if you tell me I have 48 minutes, I'm going to come in at 48 minutes because I always read it 17 times. It turns out that this discussant felt I was going to go too long, right? And left several messages that I heard because they were leaving it with a friend of mine that said they would not speak if I went over my time.
Wow.
Now remember, I'm beginning my first time. This is the star of the field, okay?
Wow.
And I knew that I was not going to go over my time. I knew it because I had done it.
Right.
I had to make a commitment that if I was not finished by X amount of minutes, so that the discussant had his time, I had to stop in the middle of the paper. Now, that's not how you treat
Right.
your aspiring young people.
Right.
I mean, it's just not nice,
Yeah.
saying it nicely. That is typical of how my generation was treated. There was a group that kept tight control. Then one person got in. My analyst got in, who was not in that group. And then I got a call asking me to teach. How did I get that call? Did I apply? No. I would never have thought of being on the faculty. I can't be on the faculty with those guys. They're, I idealize them for some reason. But I get this call to teach Freud Part 2 because the person teaching the year of Freud was from Israel and had to go back. So they needed a teacher. And meanwhile, I'm writing my book. I had left St. Luke's by then. I was in practice. I'm writing. And I said, this is not my course, Freud Part 2. It's not the one I would do. I thought about it and I realized, of course I'm going to do it. So I stopped everything. I learned Freud Part 2 and they liked it. So they asked me to continue. I started teaching the cases as part of neurosis, but the cases are not neurotic. So I turned it into neurotic personality organization. I started teaching like love, sadomasochistic relationships. I just added a whole long thing and had a developmental focus that neurosis is a developmental achievement. And then the technique course opened up and the year-long course, which I was happy to do. I love teaching that course. I miss it terribly. I gave it up, but I miss it. And what I did with that, as I was telling you, is I turned the first 5 weeks or so into a course on the development of contemporary Freudian theory. From modern conflict theory, which assumes only a dynamic approach, to conflict and deficit, which is what if structures aren't developed, to representational theory. Because I thought that people reading papers on technique had to understand the assumptions people were making. Otherwise, it becomes, how do you understand? Do this, do that. Right. But why? So that's how I became teacher. And then they opened it up. By then, the group was either older, not as interested, whatever the hell it is, I don't know. But a whole bunch of us got onto the faculty. And the people who taught you were my cohort, probably. Right. Richie, Gil, Mary, I mean, a whole group.
Right. So that's very interesting. What year did you start teaching at Postdoc?
Figure the mid-'80s.
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 Was there a relational track already or not
By
yet?
then there was a relational track, I think. I can't swear.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly, when it started, but then, yeah. And then, by then I was teaching a lot. And it was too much, but I kept it up for a long time. I was out every night because I was president or a dean of IPTAR. Time. I was teaching IPTAR I was teaching at White. They asked me to teach Freud at White. So for 5 years, I would teach contemporary Freudian theory at White. On Tuesday night, I would teach Postdoc on Wednesday morning, and I would teach IPTAR Wednesday night, different classes. And I kept preparing, so I was a lunatic. And that's why at some point really I began to give it up. Yeah.
But we are so fortunate that you came back, and that we had Gil and many others come back.
Oh yeah, yeah. Listen, I'm grateful for all of it. I loved it. I love it. I miss it. I have no regrets. I loved it.
Yeah.
And I love the opportunity. People don't have that opportunity.
Right. And I think the way that you describe the progression of your putting things together and developing your own theory and technique, which, as you said, are intertwined, I cannot avoid but think about your class, which I was very fortunate to take a 2-semester, 2-credit course, and the fact that you integrated so much, including contemporary psychoanalysis and international psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
But your focus, in my mind, and correct me this is incorrect, your focus was always in the dialectic relationship between this and that, the internal and the external, the conflict and deficit, content and process. And I guess I'm wondering, is this always been you? I mean, I hear you came in not knowing if you're interpersonal or Freudian. So I guess it's a question, were you always in the in-between or trying to find the differences and commonalities from a theoretical perspective and personally?
I think already I was finding the commonalities. For me, it was never deficit versus conflict. It was always conflict in the context of deficit. Mm-hmm. I actually wrote a paper on that, which was published in a book, so nobody ever reads those. It was a book that I have to get up and look. But it was based on a conference, and Carol Nellman was the editor. But it was, and then I Xeroxed it, so I would assign it. But it was always if you don't have the capacity to have a holding introject, how does that deal with separation? How does that deal with anger? And it's not that there's no conflict, it's that they come together. I don't think anymore what are the differences between Freudian theory and relational theory.
Right.
I might have done that 30 years ago. Yeah. For me, if it comes up, we can look at the differences. As I said, I think that the Freudians have moved to a point where they are much more sensitive to what's going on in treatment in a way they weren't before. And the relational people have much more developed the theory of mind. And then it's people talking and it's fun. And Lou and I taught that course together, right. Which was terrific. Yeah. Where he would come up with he would assign a paper, I would assign a paper, and we each present our papers, then we would discuss it. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And Lou and I worked, that's what came up at the Lowell thing. Mm-hmm. Lou takes Lowell in a very different direction. Right. Okay. I mean, it's, I don't do that. I don't get involved in that anymore. Maybe I'm much more integrated. You know, it happens you get older.
And my impression was that you both really are more inclined towards finding the common ground than the differences.
Yeah. But I think postdoc has become that way too much more.
Yes, thankfully.
At the same time, there's something liberating about being a postdoc. The obvious thing is that you can take classes, and you should, with different people. Mm-hmm. And it's a very faculty-driven place, by the way. If people don't like you as a teacher, you may be teaching the most essential course. They don't care. They're not going to take it. Exactly. As opposed to a place where it's a structured curriculum, where you're taking it, whoever's teaching it. But it's not just that. It's that because you're in class with people who are from other orientations, there's a sense of openness. There's a sense of receptivity, even if you don't agree with each other. Agreed. You don't dismiss so fast. Whereas at other places, it's more like you're getting your dogma, you're getting your religion. This is how it is. You don't get that at postdoc so much. Right. And that's a lovely thing about postdoc, and I hope they don't lose it.
Me too. The essence is really to develop your own voice based on learning.
And you really can develop your own voice.
Agreed.
And there's always somebody who's there to help you develop it.
That's exactly right. I guess I'm wondering, you you walked us a little through different times throughout your own developmental process of thinking and as a clinician. And we are coming to today and postdoc. I was wondering what are your hopes in terms of the direction that the field could take or maybe needs to take to continue to grow?
I think postdoc at its best takes advantage of the communication between tracks and within tracks. And I realize it when I'm exposed to people, let's say from the medical institutes. It's a different Freud, very different Freud. We are much more cutting edge.
Yes.
As Freudians, but I'll bet you the relational track in the same way than most people realize. And you only know it when you're out, when you see what else is going on. And I think we are at our best when we kind of are exposed to that in different ways. And things come serendipitously. I'll give you an example. I was given this paper, and if you would have said to me, how does the social come into the psychoanalytic? I would have said, well, it doesn't, or it comes in through the superego. So when I say that, I'm saying, look, we have a theoretical way of doing it. It comes in through the superego. So what? So I guess it would mean something like, you're taught certain things, certain values, blah, 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 blah. Okay. I'm giving this talk that you just heard, the Lowell talk.
Yes.
And one of the things, pause, not you. The videographer's in the room, Eli's in the room, thank you. I've become much less interested in theory per se and more interested in how psychoanalysis actually works. And things that that are too complicated for us to talk about. And most of the time we'll say, let's talk about interpretation, because that's the theory tells us to talk about that. And what is it, blah, blah, blah. But we can't talk about the, quote, non-specific factors. But we all know that it's the non-specific factors that make an enormous difference. And Ted Jacobs was just saying in a talk that people don't remember some interpretation that they got 20 years ago. They remember the time their analyst was nice to them, was a mensch, lent them an umbrella. And we all have stories. Every one of it, and we don't write about them. The analysts don't write about them because it makes you sound like you're violating the frame or stuff like that. I'm interested in that. And one of the things I was talking about was that every communication has a meta-communication, and every interpretation has a meta-communication. And in that, and a lot of things are carried in that meta-communication. And in that meta-communication, one of the things carried is the analyst's view of the world and of life. Usually it's specific. It's like the example I gave is if I say, you don't let yourself realize that you could be a better analyst than me, to a patient. Now, that's supposed to be an interpretation that says you're afraid of your competition. But what my patient then said to me several weeks later is, that was so opening for me because you made it, you acknowledge that I could think about that. I think, forgetting the superego, I think culture comes in through the meta-communications in our communications. That's something to develop, We could play with these kind of ideas, and postdoc is a great place to play with them.
Can I ask you just a bit more about that? How culture comes in?
It comes in because it has to do with the assumptions that we make about what people are like, what life is like. I heard a talk 2 nights ago from Nasir Ilahi, who was talking about how our assumptions about separation and about individual are very American and British. If you were from another culture, there's a kind of embeddedness in a social system that makes more of a difference.
That's right.
What kind of things give meaning in the world? These are all assumptions we make that are embedded in what we talk about.
Yes.
I remember I was working with somebody who works with trans patients a lot. And she was telling me that she will sometimes actively say things to counter a kind of cultural assumption that there's something pathological about that. And it was only now that I begin to understand it, that we make certain assumptions that we don't even realize we're making, and that sometimes those assumptions come out all the time. Look, it comes out in lots of ways. Somebody will say you're being Talmudic. They don't mean that as a compliment.
Mm-hmm.
They mean that as obsessive.
Right.
But that's the opposite of what Talmudic is.
Mm-hmm.
Completely.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way certain cultural assumptions about whatever, Judaism,
Absolutely.
whatever, come in the way, that have to be recognized and confronted. So it's those meta-communications that I think are worth looking at. 2 examples.
Very much so. I appreciate you saying that.
That the what I'm afraid of happening is that this world and this field has gotten so political that we're destroying our institutions. We destroyed Division 39.
Mm-hmm.
We had to shut down our postdoc listserv.
Yes.
IPTA had all kind of fights. They're all having it because all of us believe passionately in certain things. And what happens is that takes over. And then it becomes, we forget that we're here to learn psychoanalysis together while appreciating and acknowledging our differences. And it becomes more, we're going to have a fight. And I'm afraid that that's going to become the future.
Yeah. Can we find the common ground, right? Can we agree to disagree as part of being psychoanalysts?
Yeah, and remember that we're here, this is our purpose.
Yeah.
The purpose of our group is to learn psychoanalysis.
Yeah. And hopefully we can.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that leads me to a question about the future, and perhaps if there is any advice or any thoughts that you would want to share with the new candidates or with the candidates who are still in training.
Get involved. I loved teaching. I still love it. Because when you teach, it's a creative thing. You're curating papers and you're putting them together in your own way. And there are many opportunities to teach. Take them. I did organizational work for many years. I actually remember the day that I said I got to stop it. I was walking to a meeting and on a Thursday night, and the restaurants were packed. And I said, you know, they're all eating out, and I'm going to a meeting, which I've been to every night this week. But I loved it. Mm-hmm. I had a chance, and you're doing it now. Now you're crazed with it. But to be involved in shaping education, in shaping psychoanalysis, and between getting involved on the administrative level and getting involved on the teaching level, getting involved with others, it makes it a community, and it you grow from it. It's very isolating just to sit in your office and see patients. If you can write. I mean, I love it. Not everybody does, and we all find our niche. Some people like administration, some people like, but get involved in some way. Yeah. That's what I would do. For yourself, don't do it for networking. Don't do it to get ahead, because you'll hate it. Mm-hmm. Do it because you find something you love about it, and then you're enjoying it. And I did. I feel grateful to all of it.
Yeah, thank you. And like you said, getting involved, teaching, mentoring, supervising, it all helps develop your own voice and be part of a community, right?
That's right.
You know, you, Andy, are a very beloved person in our community and very highly respected. Your class was always oversubscribed.
Thank you. Thank you.
And we all learned so much from you. And I think today we're learning. I guess I was wondering if there is anything about you, about your personal interest, your life, anything personal that you want to share that we may not know.
Anything personal about my life that you might not know?
What about you?
I don't work on Friday, and I use Friday to go visit my grandchildren. I learned actually from my wife, when our first grandchild was born, that the difference between kids and grandkids is the kids are always there. But grandchildren, you have to make an effort to see, because they're not always there. My wife actually preceded me the first year our first grandchild was born. She went once a week. By into that year, I started going every Friday. I would play with my grandchild and the grandkids, and I've continued pretty much to do that. What happens is that the kids get older, their schedules change, so they're not always sitting around free when you are. They also have other interests, so if I come on Friday and they have a playoff game or something like that, or a play date, so it changes, the relationship changes. And I remember, you know, the other thing when you have kids is, you have kids, you're working, right? The kids have, you know, they're home from school, right? Okay, we have dinner, you have a bath, you got to clean up the toys, et cetera, you know, you got to read. And I remember picking up my grandchild from school, and he decides to take the leaves next to a grate and drop them into the grate. 1, 2, 3, 20 minutes. We're sitting and I'm dropping it. And I'm saying, I don't care, this is my play date.
Exactly.
If this was my kid, I think we got to get home because, you know, there's dinner and there's this and that, you know. And then we get home and he wants a cookie. And my first thought was, did he eat lunch? And then I say, I'm the grandfather. Here, take a cookie. What do I get? You know. That's what I do with Fridays. It's worth it. It's been worth it.
Yeah, and thank you for that. They are and you are so fortunate to have each other. But I think it's also a reminder, right? Get involved, do more for the community and also have a personal life.
Yeah.
Don't miss
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Andy. This was incredibly meaningful and
Thank you, Carina. I hope so. I hope so.